Buried in a Washington Post article about Joe Biden and what he's working on now behind the scenes, we got this little gem. You can see the highlighted portion here. Despite pressure from Democratic leadership, White House officials are also prepared to table a measure they had included in earlier drafts aimed at reducing consumer and government spending on prescription drugs, a measure fiercely opposed by the pharmaceutical industry, the People said. So you know what that means? Joe Biden, just like the president before him and the president before him, is caving on having Medicare negotiate for better drug prices, having the federal government negotiate for better drug prices. See, the way it works now is other countries negotiate with pharma to get better prices. And, other countries generally have national healthcare systems, so the government negotiates on behalf of the citizenry, and they get decent prices. And the U.S. has a provision that the government cannot negotiate with pharma for better prices. So in other words, whatever pharma says to pay, the U.S. pays. Now, we get insanely screwed with this being the case, because oftentimes what happens is foreign governments get really good deals on the drugs, and so pharma tries to make all their profits by hosing us here. And so that's why you have just completely out of control drug prices in this country. It's one of the reasons why you have completely out of control drug prices. And every administration comes in saying, federal government is going to negotiate for better drug prices. And every single time they cave. Now, why? Why is that? Listen, I honestly think it's a naive position if you believe they just hear out the arguments and make the objective decision that it's better to just leave the American people getting price gouged. I think the reality of it is special interests and lobbyists get their ear. And pharma donates a tremendous amount of money to both political parties. And so, really, at the end of the day, they say, we own you, we control you. And that's why they end up acting in the best interest of pharma and against the best interest of the American people. And that's where we are. Obama backed off on this, and Trump backed off on this. They both backed off on this. Lowering drug prices, negotiating with pharma. And ultimately, I think it's because of the influence pharma has in Washington, D.C., and how they've basically bought both political parties to some extent, certainly various politicians. Certainly, what we learned about Biden is that one of his top advisors' brother is lobbying on behalf of healthcare companies, including pharma, and this could be that guy's influence, for example. It's insane because it shows you they're not really making the decisions based off of what's best for the American people, what the constituents want. If you poll this, and maybe they have, if they have, I haven't seen it or I forgot it, but I'm sure this polls at like 90% or something crazy. 80 to 90% of the public is like, yeah, negotiate for better prices with pharma. But they're going to do the opposite. This is a lot like the debate going on right now with the intellectual property rights, the patent rights for the vaccine. So the rest of the world is screaming at the United States of America to lift the intellectual property rights for pharma when it comes to the vaccines. Why? Because developing countries desperately need to get their hands on the vaccine. And to this point, Biden hasn't done it. And the media keeps assuming, oh, he's thinking about it, he's making up his mind. The reality is, Adam Johnson pointed this out, I think he's correct. The reality is, Biden opposes lifting the intellectual property rights for them, but he doesn't want the bad press of saying, I'm against lifting the intellectual property rights. Because really, and I use this word on purpose, this decision is genocidal. If you don't lift the intellectual property rights, then you can't get nearly as many vaccines created in these other countries, which means not nearly as many people can get it, and they can't get it quickly. And so many people are going to die as a result of that. It is truly a genocidal policy. And that's what this reminds me of, because you have one side which is clearly the correct thing to do, and the other side which is psychopathic thing to do, and they're doing the psychopathic thing. And I do think that's in part because of the influence of corruption, money in politics, legalized bribery. Now, I'm sure that lobbyists have some sort of arguments that they make in order to deflect and obfuscate, but really, you should be able to see through them if you're an adult with a functioning brain. Like the thing that Big Pharma says about the intellectual property rights for the vaccine, they say, oh, the reason why we need this in place is not because we're against these other nations getting the vaccine, and it's not because we care so much about our profits. No, it's because if we lift the intellectual property rights and the patents and everything and we let them do it, they have shitty facilities where they make the vaccines and the stuff is going to be unsafe, and then people are going to die because they're going to make the vaccines wrong and it's going to be cut with dangerous stuff, and we care so much about the people in these countries making sure they get a safe and effective vaccine that we just can't lift the intellectual property rights, because we can swear by the quality of our product. We can't swear by the quality of, some vaccine maker in India putting together a vaccine with our formula. They're going to mess it up, and we can't have that. But of course, that's just a nonsense, bogus rationalization, because they do care about their bottom line. They do care about the profit motive. And, they've made that argument in moments of honesty. They've made that argument. Like, why would we do any research and development if at the end of the day you just get rid of our intellectual property rights like that? And the response to that is, you jackasses don't even do most of the research and development. Most of the research and development for all these drugs and vaccines and medicine, it's done with public money. I believe the number is $41 billion the National Institute of Health spends on research and development for new drugs. So taxpayers pay for it, then you swoop in and get the intellectual property rights to it, and then you double charge us on the back end. You price gouge us on the back end when the taxpayers paid for the research up front. And they won't even let developing countries use the intellectual property to make their own vaccines to save lives. And instead, what we're getting from Biden, this is classic Biden in many ways, is a bullshit middle path. So what's he saying? Oh, we have a surplus of, which vaccine is it? I think it's the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is the UK vaccine. Somehow we have some of those. Biden says, oh, we're going to share our surplus AstraZeneca vaccines with India because they're having a terrible outbreak right now. And so he's trying to split the difference. Oh, we'll give you some drugs and we'll give you this vaccine that we have stockpiled waiting around. It's not, none of that is enough. That's not nearly enough. You need to lift the intellectual property rights. You need to allow whoever can make the vaccine to make the vaccine. And there's this other lie out there that, oh, they just don't have the capability to make it. So the problem is with materials. Nonsense! Other countries have been screaming at the top of their lungs, let us make the vaccines! And we're not here because pharma does care first and foremost about their profits, and they own the government, and so the government is siding with them. It truly, truly is genocidal, and I don't use that term lightly. And of course, here you have Biden caving on negotiating for better drug prices, again, because of the influence of pharma in Washington, D.C. So if you don't see how corruption is the main problem, I don't know what to tell you. Because it clearly is. It clearly is. You would not have these problems if you had clean elections by law, a ban on private money in politics. So you have clean elections. The other thing is, I would punish corruption way more severely than we do now. I think corruption should be life in prison. Punish corruption like that, only have clean elections, so therefore the politicians will represent the people and not the special interests, not the corporations, not the billionaires, not the lobbyists, and we'd be much better off and the decisions would be reasonable. This is anything but reasonable.